everyone for joining us this evening for a Localtalks session. This is our first Localtalks session of the year. We have 4 every year, every third month of the year. And we have people joining us in person in our audience, but we also have people online who I'm sure will continue to join us as the event goes ahead. Today our topic is participatory design. I'm quite excited to hear about this topic. We have all 3 speakers with us today here in person, so they'll be taking over right after me. This evening we have Cristopher Cripps, an architect and strategic planner. We have Lawrence Okoth, the industrial designer, and Mara Forbes, who's an urban design specialist. We will share a little bit more about each one of them before they speak, so that you can get a little bit about who they are, but they may also share their presentation. So thank you for joining us. It's a very short introduction today. The event will be recorded so that it can be watched later on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel where we post all our events, and you're all welcome to join us there. The speakers will speak in the order that I introduced them. So we'll start with Cristopher, and I will hand over to him. I think this presentation can be put up. Sure.
Hello. Thank to everybody who's here. I'm Cristopher Cripps, and I live in Hoyland. I've been in Uganda for 12 years, and I now live here. And I started my life as an architect, but now I seem to have ended up doing mostly planning, but I still buildings and enjoy it. So my presentation is going to start with a quick YouTube video.
Can you get to the left? That's okay.
Okay, I'm standing. Yeah. Okay. So if you just do that. I don't.
This has to be one of the most exciting projects in the world today. It starts with the most famous football club in the world, 1 billion followers globally. So it starts with the fans. And it starts with the idea of making something which is so intense, it brings you close to the pitch. Acoustically, it cultivates the roar. As you move away from the stadium, it's not a fortress surrounded by a sea of cars. It's open. And it's contained by an umbrella that harvests solar energy, harvests rainwater, but is protective, and it encloses arguably the largest public space in the world. It's welcoming, it's open, it's at the very heart of a new neighborhood. And then it's part of the city of Manchester, the fastest growing city in the United Kingdom. A city, again, like no other. It's a powerhouse, steeped in history. Trafford Park was the industrial heartland of the nation, a heritage which I have a personal connection to. My father was a factory worker at Metropolitan Vickers. And then the 3 masts, the Trident, visible from 40 kilometers, 200 meters high. So this becomes a global destination. Normally a stadium would take 10 years to build. We half that time, 5 years. How do we do that? By prefabrication, by using the network of Manchester Ship Canal, bringing it back to a new life, shipping in components, 160 of them, Meccano-like, and then we rebuild the Old Trafford station, and that becomes the pivot, the processional way to the stadium, welcoming and at the heart of a new sports-led neighborhood. It's walkable, it's well served by public transport, it's endowed by nature, it learns from the past, it creates streets, it's a mixed-use mini-city. So what makes a global destination? What makes something so special? It's teamwork. It's the best brains, the civic leaders, the owners, the consultants, the engineers, the architects, the fans. The list is so long. It's a team effort. That is at the heart of the success of this project.
But what he said at the end, he said it's all about teamwork. And so the question is, he listed those people, actually put the fans quite low down on the list, which is quite interesting. How do they participate? They are all going to participate in the design and making of that project. And it's interesting that as a very famous architect, he doesn't start off by so much talking about the design. The main thing is the participation of all players. And that I wanted that as an introductory statement. So the question is, who will participate and how? What I'm going to do is to go to slide, the next one after that. Yeah, I'm going to go right to the sort of beginning of my learning about participation and try and share some things with you so that hopefully it may be helpful. And one of the things I've been doing most of my life, especially as an architect, was when I first practiced, this thing about community participation in design was very much hot on the agenda, and I think our team was at the front of that. And as I was doing that, I was wondering, what do? I sit on my drawing board you had then, and you're on your laptop and you're designing. So when you're talking to a group of people in a community somewhere, how do you get them to do the design? How does that work? And so one thing I discovered was that in the magazines, we used to have these plans, and actually then you could get cut out shapes, and you could put, the kitchen, or in this case, like you put a table there, or the next slide there, go to the next slide. Writing fits better down there. So we all know, if you're architects or designers, that decide where's this thing, the table in the right place. You're thinking spatially, right? Now everybody thinks spatially. We live spatially in space, and everybody makes decisions about where's my bedside table or where I'm going to put the TV. Everybody's a designer in space. But when you're a professional designer and you're doing a project and you want to find out from other people what do they think about the design, you have to get them to sort of put themselves in that position. And going to the next slide, this is a good example. What tends to happen is that you have an exhibition and you put plans on the wall and you say, well, which one do you like? Do you like that one or this one? And I've seen it so many times, people come up and say, oh, I like the one on the right. Why do you like it? Because it's got colours on it. Do they ever understand it? No, they don't. Next slide. So we did a whole lot of work at that time on how to get people to actually design. And there's this wonderful organisation called Plan for Real, which apparently still exists. And it's basically going back to that thing I said at the beginning, is once you get people around the table and there's a plan, and you say, okay, where do you think the games room should be, or where should the classroom be, or where should the, you give them the shapes and they start moving them around. And to start off with, they go, what's this? And after a time, when they start doing it, they really do it. And so many times now, in my experience, as an architect, I've designed, or we did plans for towns, we did a town, and we asked people to come and play this game. We discovered our view of the town was that you entered from here. And after this, they turned around and said, no, the main entrance to the town is over there. So the very fundamental things about the design, which you have to understand and can only really understand when you get the users inhabiting and taking part. So these are examples of using shapes. So here they used to get school kids to build models of old cereal packets and draw things. You move the buildings around, right? We used to make like a game on a table like that, take it to the market, let people gather around, they say, oh, what should we give, should we give, should we give? What's you can pick up from that? It's not necessarily come up with the best solution, but it's the way they talk about it. They say, oh yeah, we usually come down here, so that needs to be there. So you listen to their spatial thinking, and that informs the design, and it makes a huge difference. this is another example of one of those plans that gets exhibited in the Ministry of Lands every week. And it's just a pretty picture. Nobody ever understands it or even makes any comments about it. I put this here because this is a famous architect from the UK called Chris Gay. He was a Steiner trained guy. And when we were doing all this stuff, we got to the point saying, okay, you're asking people to come up with their ideas. So they're always making boxes. And he said, I said, what are people really imagining in their minds the buildings could be like? And he said, oh, I use clay. Because that means that you never get a square building when you give people clay. They always make interesting shapes, you know. So it's just a small example. Move on to the next one. Okay, so I mean, here, when I was working in Ghana, when I came forward here, it was the same thing. So there's the map of the town. That's the area flooded. It's a very dusty, dry town. It's expanding, just like the ones doing here. And there's a few houses, you know, here, here, and here. So the game with guys was like, okay, every white square is like 200 houses. So first of all, work out where you're going to put them. And all the shapes are there, like the road, where are you going to put the road? So you move the cardboard around. And there's an active discussion. They're actually designing that town. But the point there was that we said, look, if you build all these houses scattered all at the same time, you're never going to get services. You know, you need to do them one at a time because they need to be concentrated in order you can afford the services. And there were like 5 people who owned the chiefs who owned these quarters. They looked at each other, and one says to the other, "Okay, you go first. Then I'll do my bit. Then you do yours." Now, I mean, they actually used the plan to organise how they would develop the town in a setting. Let's move on. Now, another level. So when I was trying to think, okay, how do you get to people to express in their minds the sort of, not just the organisation of space, but what does this thing look like? And we were working with a lot of artists, we're working with kids and so on ideas and designs and so on. So we got commissioned to do this. There's a psychiatric hospital that's being built to work with patients to come up with, you know, their view of how the design should be. And we worked in the end on this mostly here. Now, in the original design, that was just paving, there was drainage, you know, basically the kind of services area was not intended for any of the patients to go in there. But after some time, we were cutting long story short, we worked on it. And the first point I want to make on this one is that it was starting to be built when we first came to it. I remember going to the site and said to the site manager, said, "Can we see the drawings?" There was a stack of drawings, like 60, 70 drawings at a pile. Have you got one which kind of shows what it's going to be like? Well, no, not really. Yeah, I mean, I've got buildings here, and I've got the windows here, and I've got the roof, but, you know, not really. So we built a model building so that people would know what it was going to be like. This is even as it was being constructed. And one of the things that happened, took the model to consultants who are going to be using the building, and they had this discussion. This whole wing here was designed for geriatrics. And the geriatric guys have said, no, I'm not going to be in that building. I'm somewhere else, you know. So in other words, a whole section of the building was designed for people who are not going to use it. That's because it was designed by a small committee, an action by a committee. Nobody had ever seen it. It was being built. Nobody knew what it would look like. And as a result of this process, we started to open up that debate. Now, what I was coming to is that this amazing American woman I was working with at the time, she said, okay, we'll have a weekend. We'll bring some of the people who we know are going to end up there, some regular clients with mental disabilities. And we're going to bring some artists. We've got a ceramicist, and I can remember somebody who's a kite maker, landscape designer, sculptor, and so on. Group of creative people. And the project was, okay, can we come up over the weekend with a design for this space? And I was a bit scared because I was supposed to be one of the main people around. So I'm saying, well, how do you do this? First discovery was that every one of these disciplines all go through the same process of site appraisal, understanding the client, coming up with some first ideas, etc. So actually, it was quite easy for everybody to work together on the same process. And the interesting thing for me was that the poet was there, and I was thinking, why do we need a poet? Come on, really? And there was a time as in the evolution of the design where everybody was trying to kind of put their finger on exactly what is it we're trying to come up with. And we went and got drunk or whatever we did on the Saturday night. We met again on the Sunday morning. And the poet came in and read this poem. And the poem absolutely summed up exactly what we were all trying to do. So, even the poet had a part to play in the way the design worked. So what I'm saying is that I did several projects after that, is that the arts are ways of communicating, participating with people about different things. So if you involve artists in terms of the way the building evolves and how people can express themselves in it and even the end result. Okay, next one. Not overwriting. This is another similar one. We had a theatre group. First thing, you had to convert this huge range of derelict buildings. And they came along to us and built these Martians, they call them, went around town alerting people. And then eventually they did all sorts of they found out ways of getting to everybody in the town. Now, the concept of the building was by a very sort of smart architect's office in Leeds, and the way the building was designed, it was all like, probably look like this or whatever, and maybe more like market, and that was they're going to do all like that. Then the kids came in, the next slide, this is an example, and they said, like, skate park, cinema, bingo, it's not a very good slide. No more housing. In other words, we don't want any more sort of expensive people coming into town and property prices going up. That's the housing we're talking about. Ice rink, and there was one down here about overrun with cats. And then so immediately your whole idea about this building shifts and did shift. Next one. Now this is my last one. This is in Leeds. This is an interesting area because up there is the Leeds city centre, and this is the old industrial area of Leeds, which had become completely derelict, very much like the industrial area here. And government was putting a lot of money, they wanted to turn it into like a digital hub and all that kind of thing. And we were working with them and the community. So there was a big Asian community next door, which was kind of cut off. And no, you're not going to be part of this, because this is for the kind of other middle class professionals, etc. But what we did was we created trails from the surrounding communities into this area, invited everybody into this derelict area and did an event. Next slide, which is called here, what kind of place? And what kind of place do you want this to be? And this is part of the trail. There's exhibitions, there's a lot going on. It's a big day. Interestingly, the people who are funding it were the sort of top brass in Yorkshire Board, which was a development agency. They had an office on the edge of the area and they were funding it. They had never walked around it. So we got everybody to walk around the area. And the next slide. Then we also brought artists to had an art commission, and everybody had to pick a location to do something. This is a very nice one somebody came up with, and imagine, don't look here, don't look there. But when you look through the door, you see what was in that house 100 years ago and what the area used to be like at that time. So all of these little points around the area became points of thinking about, okay, what are we doing here? Okay. So let me just go to one more, and I think that's it. And here was another one I was doing in Accra, again, based on up to what we've done in Leeds. We did a trail that's a very good way of getting people to come up with what you think should happen in the area. And out of that came concepts for local business and regeneration. I think it's a bit like Stonetown in Zanzibar. It had that kind of potential. But the trail is the way of getting people to come and visit and go around and think, oh, right, okay. So, I mean, I'm showing you here, there's a range of different ways of getting involved in participation. And that comes to the end of my story. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us. I hope the microphone is working. Just now. Right. Thank you for the presentation. Actually, I had forgotten I had a short introduction to share about you in the background, but thank you for sharing anyway. We do have Lauren up next, and now I remember, so I will share a short profile about Lauren. So Lauren Okoth is an industrial designer leveraging human-centered design to drive sustainable development across products, services, systems, and architecture. Since 2015, he has collaborated with organizations like the International Trade Center, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and Macquarie Universities to create impactful solutions in low-resource settings. He's an innovation director at Design Without Borders and team lead at the Object Lab Uganda. Thank you for joining us, Lauren. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks a lot, Franny. I don't think I've just realized right now I've never had an introduction made of me. Thanks everybody for joining and for making the time. Very glad to be here, and thanks to the Localtalks team for the opportunity to share on a topic that's very important. Yes, so a topic that's very important to the Design Without Borders team, who I'd also like to recognize for all of the work that I'll be sharing. And as you might see, it's not a very large team. It's a team of only about 11. We always average about 11 people, but it's people with very diverse backgrounds. So we have lots of runaway architects that are trying to practice in different ways. We have urbanists, we also often have sociologists, community workers, and the like. And these are some of the projects that we've done. I'll just go through one or two. There's an eco stove over there. Actually, when I joined in 2015, this is sort of a project that introduced me to product design, being that I just graduated from architecture. There was an attempt to try and mass produce an object that's very often produced artisanally. And then there's the border helmet, which you can also probably recognize, where we try to include some venting because of the tropical region that we are in. So just to make it a bit more comfortable, as well as what you might notice or not notice, this small hole near the ear of the wearer. As you know, border guys like to tell lots of stories, and so we thought it should be possible for the passenger to communicate with the border rider. On the service design side, we have a couple as well. This particular one we did with MTN Uganda, trying to see there's an application that they developed, a service they developed, that's about giving access to financial services, specifically loans and loans, as well as the ability to make savings for people in rural areas. People in rural areas were not using the product, so they sent us in to try and find out how to improve the service for that. But I think in most of the work that we do, and maybe also in many ways the personal journey of mine has been to try and redefine the role of the designer. And as we might all know, since the advent of participatory design methods, including design thinking, human-centered design, user-centered design, there's been a move from instances where we see the designer as an expert, all the way to the designer being more as a teacher and as a facilitator. And very likely in the future where we see the designer more as a mentor and advisor of a process that's already happening. But the best way to think about how the role of the designer evolves and what benefits there might be in carrying out a participatory process. In a few examples, this is a fairly popular or at least well-known project. It's around about clay pump, as it's called. The idea is that a pump is used by kids, as you can see in the image, and water is transferred into a tank that's overhead, you can see in the background. But then the thing is also, this tank integrates billboards, where whoever is using the billboard for advertising can actually pay for that service, and that money is used to maintain the pump in turn. It was designed in the 80s and implemented first in South Africa in the 90s. And while this was the expectation, this was then a reality that you had adults attempting to recreate the energy that children would in order to fill a 2,500 meter tank. Obviously, the result was that, I mean, it's clearly you cannot rely on children's energy because they'll probably play for 1 hour and then, the rest of the day or the rest of the afternoon or morning, they are not really available to help with this process. And the thing is, it always took about, it was claimed that it should take 2 hours to fill, 2 hours of constant pumping to fill the tank. But in real life, it was actually taking 4 hours to pump. And then the capacity wasn't really enough, so the tank was really never full. So you'd have instances where adults have to come and pump just a little, just enough to fill a 5-liter jerry can or a 20-liter jerry can, and then they're off to go about their own business. Another one is very common. Mosquito nets are very often sent to the developing world, and the expectation is that you'll have children happily smiling under the mosquito net, feeling very safe from the mosquitoes, but then nobody expects that the same mosquito nets will be used to fish. So that's, and then another one is actually more heartbreaking than anything. Is of course jaundice children are, or at least jaundice is a very common, I guess, problem that newborns might face, and in cases where it's very extreme, it might actually threaten the health of the baby to the extent that it causes brain damage. So again, we have equipment that's always donated to the developing context where the expectation is that you have a child happily healing, well, not happily, but comfortably healing from, comfortably getting their treatment and healing from this condition. So this is a phototherapy device in a hospital, but then at least in some contexts, it's rarely expected the babies are alive. So just to ease your, so it's sometimes not expected by people that make these donations, generously make these donations, that the equipment might not be used the way it's supposed to. So I guess the aim of this presentation and what I hope to achieve through this discussion is to suggest ways in which the expectation and the reality can be aligned. So how can we ensure that designers and users are sort of looking at the future in the same way? How can we increase the chances that the products and services that are developed, or the donations that are made very generously by certain groups are actually anticipating the needs and the challenges that might befall these objects? And sorry, let's take it. So what we try to do at Design Without Borders, and these are the tools that I'll be sharing, not so much about the results of the projects, but more about the process, because many of those projects are going through a lot of prototyping and pilot. We get projects that go on for 4 years, 2 years, 3 years, and very often the pilot, the testing of that product is the longest part of the project. So you can see within the human-centered design process, we start with the discover phase, which is about understanding the problem, the define phase, about focusing, developing potential solutions in the develop phase, and then finally delivering solutions that hopefully will work as well as we hope. And below, I've tried to include some of the tools that we employ each step of the way, to increase the chances that the solution that's developed will be relevant and will apply to the challenge that we are trying to solve. Context immersion is one of those that comes very early. You have to find yourself giving a lot of time to actually living in the situation that the users live in. This is a project that we did in Tanzania that has to do with reducing drowning rates for fishermen, women. Of course, women also participate, mostly as boat owners, but really looking at fishing communities and trying to be part of their everyday lives to understand the challenges that might eventually lead to drowning. So context immersion is one of those. Our designers here are Sheila. I hope she's listening online. John is from the RNLI, which is an organization in the UK that works to save lives on the shores of the UK. I'm thinking you might know about the RNLI. Yes, and then we have Dennis is also somewhere in the background. He keeps claiming this is him. We cannot verify, but he's somewhere there. User profiles and user experience. Solutions are used, objects, buildings, spaces, let's say. Everything we put out there is used by different people. And that's what this tool aims to understand, is what's the range of user profiles that might use whatever object that we are putting out there, whatever space. But it's not enough to profile just a few users. It's always very important to also look at the extremes. So looking at the people that might be most affected, as well as the people that might be least affected by the challenge that you're trying to address. This is also something that we do a lot. We are always on the lookout for methodologies that will help us understand users a bit more, and positive deviance inquiry is one of those. This one is about looking at the community that's facing a challenge and trying to understand those within the community that might be experiencing a more positive outcome than the rest of the community. So it's quite often in those situations, it's clear that that person is doing something different. So they are exposed to the same conditions within the community, same income group, same political affiliation, same etc. Very often there's things that they share with the rest of the community, but there's something different that they are doing that's giving them a more positive outcome. Context mapping and journey mapping, which is one of our favorites, is we often ask the users what their daily experiences are like, and then take the effort to try and visualize what each of those experiences in a way that allows them to let us know if we've missed something or if we've sort of detracted from the story that they're telling. And that's actually Dennis. So here we can verify that he was part of that project. This is the same project in Tanzania. Role playing. So it's about capturing scenarios within the challenge that best describe those instances where an intervention is really, really important. So in this case, this is also a drowning prevention project for fishers. This particular one is in Uganda. We have the ladies enacting a scene where a drowning has just happened, or an accident, and trying to understand how the response, sort of the emergency response situation would look like. And then prioritizing with the community to understand what their preferences are. This is still a drowning prevention project in Tanzania. where the features were letting us know what features on life jackets, for instance, they would prefer over others. So here you can see that the most popular feature is this reflector. This is trying to explain a reflector. You know, life jackets need reflectors so people can be, the victims can be seen from a distance away very easily. The whistle was also quite popular, as well as some kind of light. And so that's information that it's best to get such information directly from the users is what I'm trying to explain. Co-creation with the community, working with the community to try and develop potential solutions, as well as being very intentional not to remain at the point where you're making sticky notes and markers and all of these things. You're actually producing prototypes of varying levels of fidelity. It could be low fidelity prototypes where you're using paper or mock-ups, all the way up to higher levels of fidelity where you're actually making a life jacket and taking it out into a community test. So I'll just highlight one or two projects. This is a project that we are currently competing in Bangladesh. In Uganda, the highest drowning rates happen amongst fishers. In Bangladesh, the highest drowning rates are amongst children under 2 years. And this particular project was focused on children under 2 years old. So the highest drowning rates are amongst children under 5 years old. And I think there's an age group. I really don't remember the exact age group, but it's on the lower side. So it's amongst children or young adults. It's up to 14,500 drownings annually within this age group. So it's really, really high. And just for context, in Uganda, it's 3,500 amongst the fishers. So it's a very, very large difference. Here, you can see what we're trying to do is to understand the challenge. So we have images that we've collected there to try and understand the daily lives of children, as well as their guardians. So where the children, where the guardians when the drowning happens. And it was also shown in the data, because what we also try to do is collect data. And in this case, our partners in Bangladesh collected a lot of data that showed that drowning happens mostly between the hours of, I think, was maybe 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. It's the parents, the father went to work, the guardian is probably sort of busy with whatever chores, and then the child is left unattended. But you can also see the challenge that they are facing. Bangladesh is a very waterlogged country. There's a very high percentage of the country is either river or swamp. But then water is also a very core part of their livelihood, everyday life. So it's very easy to find points like this within 20 meters of homesteads. So yes, it's the children who are drowning as opposed to the adults which is the case in Uganda. You can see our engagement of the guardians in this case. It's the lower image on the left, as well as our head of design engaging in some mapping activity to understand their daily lives. And then, of course, we had the challenge of language barrier. We've had lots of translators speaking to Dennis and to Abigail about what the guardians had said or what the participants in workshops had said, to try and get the most accurate record of their daily experiences. Because now these were going to come into Uganda and with our partners in the UK to try and see how we start to respond to the situation. So you can see a very big effort made in trying to close that language gap. And then trying to work towards a more defined map of how that happens. In this case, trying to capture what happens in a full day from around 5 a.m., which is when most of these guardians wake up, all the way to 10 p.m. So you can see the start and the end there, and it goes in that direction. You can see at some point the father goes to the mosque to pray. At some point, the mother takes the the cows to the farm or to feed. At some point she's cooking. You can see them having breakfast, so the father is back. Along the way, you start to notice where the child and the guardian might be separated. And then in our case, what we followed that, this is now just a close-up trying to show exactly what's happening. But at some point, that is then taken back to the community to start developing ideas. So here you can see a range of ideas. So these have been reproduced by the design team, but were taken directly, or at least shared with the community for validation based on descriptions or solutions that they suggested. So you can see everything from tethered toys, a dedicated caregiver, a fast response team, playpens, door barriers, all of these sort of being passed by the community for validation by the design team. There was up to 57 ideas, if I remember correctly, with this particular selection. So I think a question that I often get is, where does the design team make its contribution? There's several points within the process where we attempt to make a contribution, make sketches, we make models, we make mock-ups. But what is really important is that you have to keep taking feedback to the community to get validation. And in the early stages, it's not just about collecting, but getting their validation. It's about actually getting them to sketch wherever you can, like Chris has just been presenting. It's to get them to be part of that process. And I completely share the sentiment. It's very hard to get them to sketch, but when you bring the physical object, it becomes easier because people are very visual and they are very, they like things that are more tactile and less tactile. So they like to engage with things that will get them thinking and get them excited. Perhaps maybe there's one more project, is this one. We are looking at vertical fonts. Sorry, so just to complete this one, those are currently being, so the design is still happening. We're now in the conceptualization stage, after which we shall be getting into prototyping as well as testing. So for now, that's really as far as I can show for this one. With the vertical gardens project, this is interesting because it's a client we've been working with since 2019, and there's always iterations for what seems like a very simple project, just a vertical garden, right? But I think this is also good because previously he hadn't engaged in a human-centered design process, or let alone a product design process. So that's Paul in the top right corner. And his innovation is essentially a garden set up in that manner with a compost chamber in the center where you can place compost, so dry foods. But then you also have worms that are earthworms that are inserted at the bottom of the garden so that they can, they're inserted at the top so they can travel within the garden every once in a while to sort of fertilize the soil, but then also retreat to the compost chamber in the middle to feed or to escape water. If the garden is very wet, they sort of retreat to the chamber to get better conditions. So there's a whole science around earthworms and how they behave that Paul decided to delve into, and then approached us to think about how to scale this project. So to really think of how to define the garden, the design of the garden on a product design level. We started, of course, with by speaking to users. So Paul brought in some farmers. He was actually interested in urban farming, so he wanted to make this available for urban dwellers, low-income urban dwellers. And so he invited some farmers, many of his most regular customers, people that he thought that would have a very easy conversation with, and would be able to get feedback. But then invited them to really engage in a process where we were trying to understand the context within which they use the garden. So it's an urban setting. There's obviously limitations around space. We are looking at informal settlements within the urban space. So there's very informal parks, very informal entrances into what might seem like a homestead, but it's not. There's very bad land tenure systems because you don't own the land that you're sitting on. So all of those challenges, we try to capture them in the form of sketches directly completed by the users. We try to complete the design criteria, getting them to vote on what is most important for them. So in this case, affordability clearly scored the most, but then also looking at what kind of plants, of course, around here with the understanding that different plants have different sizes of roots and grow to different heights and require different levels of sunlight. Tomatoes have those who are the highest. And then, sorry. Here we can start to see the sketches that they made. If you look very closely, you might be able to locate the gardens and their preferred placements. But yeah, so this is just to show that they engaged in some level of sketching. I think probably the easiest one to might be so the one in the top right corner. But what's also clear from that particular placement is the biggest challenge that we faced was one of exposure to sunlight. And so we tried to model different housing typologies to understand how much space is typically available to people that live in apartments. So you can see that here. And then the upper one is what we often call rentals. So those are all just built on the ground, and then you have lots of units sharing close compound. But then also, how about informal settlements? So this is where we have all the informality. You have a playground, but then you also have a grazing area for cattle. You might even have different housing typologies within the informal settlement. So you can see maybe some one family lives in this house, but then in the next house, it's like an extended family. We created concepts that you can see down here, and then invited the farmers and the users to price each concept based purely on perception. So we can see that they thought that this one would be the most expensive for the concrete garden. So we went ahead and started to do some prototyping, looking at, of course, Paul started to notice that he might want to look into different prototypes. So one that's low cost and the other that's a bit higher up market. And so we did the concrete version as well as the wooden frame version. It then happened that the concrete version actually scored cheaper in the long run than the wooden frame, mostly because this can be produced a bit more efficiently than the latter. But anyway, so this is the prototyping process. For those two, we had to make some silicone molds to get the thin shell concrete cast. And then we were also attempting different colors for the concrete. We had a lot of breakages, so we also had to arrive at a very specific mix for the concrete to stay stable. And then that's the final prototype on the left, and then that's my son giving some feedback, giving some very clear feedback about where to place the garden. And then that product evolved. He was approached by Save the Children to try and develop something for refugee settlements. We were very fortunate to have our second design fellowship running. And so we invited the fellows to carry out this project. They went into I believe it was two refugee settlements, one of the largest in northern Uganda, Rhino Camp, and then came up with ideas that we thought we could take into prototyping. Again, the farmers were involved to select which prototype they wanted to carry on with. Sorry, not the farmers, the refugees in some of the settlements were involved, as well as their administrators, because the situation there with the funding for objects like this can be really, really complex. And then took that into prototyping. We built the one on the left and then invited carpenters to try and replicate. So we had a lot of challenges building the first one. There were lots of joints. It was very difficult to use anything, any glue, for instance, because we were trying to avoid nails. We were using some potato sacks to create this mock-up. But then thought, okay, so since this thing is really, really difficult to build, let's see if carpenters can build it faster than we can. So they built the one on the right, but it was really, really, it was quite clear we were not going to implement this because constructing 100 of these in the refugee camp was going to be a complete disaster because of just how complex it was to try and set this up. Also, from our process, we started to notice that Paul would probably be able to make some money off this if he focused on supplying the compost chamber and then letting the community build everything beyond that. That would allow us to take the price much lower. So we started that to focus on that strategy and try to design something that the community will be able to construct very rapidly, but also trying to maintain some level of aesthetic, because that still matters even in settings like that. You want to have a beautiful farm in your compound. So this is what we started trying to think. We started to experiment with this kind of construction, and then developed a guide that whoever is not part of the design process could use to create the weave, and that's mostly for structural purposes. There's a very particular way you have to pass the weave around if you're going to use one string continuously without cutting it. So that was again to make it easy to implement. So we tested that out with the client team and it worked out fairly well. There were things that we had to address. Again, this was just a mock-up. But it was meant to lead us to the final product, which would resolve materials and durability and all of it. And then Paul took it to the refugee camp to get the communities to try and construct it. It wasn't the easiest experience. If you look at this image closely, the weave idea did not work in all cases, but in some cases it did work well. He also cut down costs in transportation. He was able to transport very many of those gardens in one truck, just enough for him to test the idea. And those were some of the results that we got from the refugee settlements. They said that what they saw was an improvement in capacity, so the number of plants that they plant in one garden. They also said that it was very good at, it was very efficient in terms of water use, because then you're constantly absorbing the water from the ground that might sit on the lower part of the garden, but up into the garden. The worms were very alive and well, thankfully. And yeah, I guess they were quite comfortable with the general look of cost of things that we need to improve, and that's sort of the next step. Is to address issues around durability, for instance, because now that starts to play very hard into the cost of the garden, as well as the fact that you have to use materials that are friendly for food and this is the garden. So just trying to keep all of those things taken care of. That's the next step. I will stop there. I will stop there, but thank you very much for listening. I look forward
Thank you very much. I think it was interesting to hear a few different projects and how you guys have been involved at different stages. So really interesting to hear. Just to let everyone know who is online, you can share questions in the chat at the end of just one more speaker, Mara, and after her presentation, we will then open up the floor for a discussion. So if you have questions, you're welcome to leave them there or ask later. And now I'll introduce Mara, the international development practitioner with over 12 years of experience in community-driven urban development projects across Sub-Saharan Africa. She's dedicated to ensuring that vulnerable communities, particularly slum dwellers, women, youth, and displacement-affected population, are at the forefront of shaping inclusive and resilient cities. She has held leadership positions in strategy, partnership development, program design and management, and learning, monitoring, and evaluation at both national and international levels. She is currently a technical advisor at Cities Alliance in Kampala, Uganda, and has worked at Slum Dwellers International and other organizations. Thank you, Maya, for joining us. I will hand over to you. Yeah. So my presentation is looking at co-creating resilient cities. So really working with informal settlement dwellers and those at risk to do different types of design, collaboration, and empowerment. So just, I can do it, huh? So just a brief kind of structure of what I'm going to talk about, just to give you a little bit of context and background information. Randy mentioned, so I've been working in Africa for the last 12 plus years, really working in informality and in urban settings, trying to address urban poverty and really focused from the community building social cohesion side. So unlike the previous speakers, I'm not an architect or a technical designer, but I come from the much more kind of the social angle of it. So today I'll share a bit of the background of some of the work I've done, both with Cities Alliance and with SDI, which is Slum Dwellers International, and provide a little bit of some examples from Kenya, South Africa, Sierra Leone, and then a few key takeaways. So just to start, so for those of you who don't know, Cities Alliance is a global partnership that's looking to fight urban poverty and really looking at the role of cities, and in particular, secondary cities. And so we function through a multi-donor trust fund and are hosted by UNOPS, and that's how we kind of implement our different activities at regional and national level. So a little bit about Cities Alliance. So Cities Alliance was established 25 years ago in 1999 during the launch of the Cities Without Slums Action Plan, in which Nelson Mandela was the patron. So this was being launched alongside the Millennium Development Goals with the goal to improve the lives of 100 million slum dwellers. So just to note, this was the first time that there was a sustainable development goal that focused specifically on the role of cities and particularly on slums and informal settlement. So as I mentioned, we're a network organization. So these are different types of organizations that we work with and through. Work with national governments are part of our membership, local authorities, and the key thing to note here is we don't work with individual local authorities, but associations of organized local authorities through multilateral organizations, UN Habitat, UNCDF, the World Bank, and then civil society partners. So Slum Dwellers International is one of those. So just a little bit about the context and background of what we're working in. So really looking at urban poverty. And so as many of you know, obviously right now, over 100 billion people live in slums today, and that's expected to double in the next 30 years to over 2 billion. Obviously, people are coming to cities and to urban areas looking for better opportunities, whether that be livelihoods, access to services such as health, education. So you have rapid urbanization happening in cities across Sub-Saharan Africa. Many of the local authorities have strained resources, whether they don't have the financial resources, the capacity, or the decision-making or implementation to actually provide some of the essential services. And obviously those, as you can see from the photo, this is in Freetown this past year in Sierra Leone. Compounding risks such as climate change, informal settlements typically are obviously on at-risk areas. So whether that's in coastal areas, wetlands, so with climate change, they are.
affected more so. So, and also just to note that informal settlements often are marginalized and not included as well. So just the key point here is that there's no real single solution that can address the complex problem of urban poverty. So, some of the examples I want to share are things that Cities Alliance has done with SDI and also SDI has done throughout the years.
But it's also
You mute yourself. I can hear some people talking. No worries. No problem. So just to share a little bit about what SDI is and how it works, because this is really central to kind of the co-production and collaboration element. So as I mentioned, SDI is also a networked organization, the global network of slum dwellers, who is built by savings groups, typically women-led savings groups that are federated at settlement, city, and national level. And it's basically a social movement, which is looking to kind of change the systematic barriers of urban poverty. So really trying to change power flows and structures, inclusion into the formal city. And so how these federations work is they bring together thousands of people. It's really a movement. So people are the people who live in these communities. And SDI currently has affiliates, what we call them, in 18 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And in each of these countries where it operates, there's the federation, which is the community social movement. There's a technical NGO that provides technical backstopping, financial support, technical capacity, and then the global network. And much of their work focuses on improving security of tenure, access to basic services, housing, livelihoods, and slum upgrading. So this is just a photo of what some of the informal settlements look like. To give you an idea, you have the housing, you have the drainage channel running through, a small little bridge kind of going across. So as I kind of mentioned, all the federations in different countries operate through a set of what we call rituals or organizing capacities. And so this is really the bedrock is around savings, and these are women-led savings. So looking at the most vulnerable or excluded, trying to really shift the power dynamics of saving money and access to money, making decisions based on resources at the very household level with women, and then being able to, excuse me, make decisions and understanding the larger good of the community. Just an example, we've seen that like when you give money or savings to women, they will always first think about, okay, I need to make sure I plan what the kids eat, that, I have funds for education, and looking at that. Whereas a lot of, no offense, times we've seen with men is they'll just take their money and go drink it and not think about the larger community or household. So really trying to change those kind of systematic barriers. Another key thing that I'll go into a bit more in some of the examples is around this community-led profiling, mapping, and enumeration. So most informal settlements aren't recognized, they're not included in city planning. People don't know the number of households that are there, the number of people. And so a key first step is really understanding what urban informality looks like. And key to this process is that it's done by slum dwellers themselves with their support NGOs. So they are trained in GPS collection, they do house-to-house mapping. We've spent days going around settlements, understanding the different boundaries. And I'll talk a bit more about that process in some of the examples. And this also gives them, they're able to go to city officials, to government, with some political capital and saying, hey, we have this information, we've organized it, our community is organized, we can show you. We have, for example, 200 households and we have one toilet. How can we work together? We know this is an issue. Can you provide land and we could provide a communal sanitation unit that can address water, sanitation, provide livelihood opportunities. So it's around that kind of collaboration between organized communities and local government. And then the third kind of key organizing principle is through learning through peer-to-peer learning exchanges. So these happen at the very local level between communities. They happen at city level between cities, as well as regionally and internationally across countries. And there's been a role to include local governments just to re-emphasize the kind of co-production and learning from your peers. So government officials can learn from their government peers in a different city and how they're working with communities. And so this has really allowed them to kind of scale these strategies and look at community-led improvements to housing, infrastructure, and services. So getting to kind of the participatory design, which most of this is through collaboration and co-creation. And I think this builds on what both Chris and Lawrence were talking about in really being on the ground, ensuring that the communities are the ones who are collecting information, analyzing it, coming up with the solutions to their problems. We've seen a lot of times, top-down solutions don't come. And I can give an example in Uganda. So in one of the slums, a public toilet was built. And we went back in a year later and it was locked and being used as a garbage pit. And people started, and there was a different donor who constructed it. And people started coming around and asking, why isn't this being used as a toilet facility? And they're like, well, no one consulted us. That's not really what we need. And this isn't really the right place to do it because you have one landowner who has hijacked it and won't allow anyone to access it. So it's really around starting from the beginning, having conversations with the communities, understanding what their needs are, and coming up with a joint kind of what's the thing that we can do that reaches the greatest good. So I think one of the key things in terms of working with slum dwellers and through SDI is because it's a movement of the people. These are the people who, it's beyond just the projects. It's looking at systematic change within the communities and how these are addressing knock-on effects. And really using these community-led practices to influence policy and institutions and implementation. And so we've seen a lot of these small-scale projects have really been able to influence larger things, and I'm going to go into some examples of how that's being done. And when it's at the local level, and is locally rooted, it's very responsive to community needs, it's sustainable, there's local ownership, it's going to continue. And so what we've seen is that working with these communities and having these community-led projects are key to really building sustainable cities. And so this is just an example of some of the profiling and enumeration. So what they do is we get aerial maps, and this is a way of kind of understanding your settlement, understanding where the access roads are, where the different settlements are, what needs to maybe be opened up, what is kind of the boundaries, all those different things. So I'm going to share a couple examples from across the network. The first one I'm going to start with is from Kenya. And just to preface it, that these are all projects and programs that have been happening for the last 5, 10 plus years, and they're ongoing processes. But this first one is from Nairobi, from Mukuru, which is one of the largest informal settlements in Nairobi. It's 689 acres. And so they got it declared as a special planning area, which basically is a legal instrument that allows them to look at an area in a different way and upgrade it holistically and not keep to kind of the same standards. And so as it's loading, this is just a bit of a background video that the local alliance put together to explain the process.
My name is Patrick Njoroge, and I work for Akiba Mashinani Trust. I am a program officer. and I've been assisting in the Mukuru Special Planning Area in terms of community mobilization and organization. The county government of Nairobi declared Mukuru as a special planning area in August 11, 2017. According to Physical Planning Act 2012, the county government can designate an area as a special planning area if that area suffers unique development and environmental challenges. The county government is supposed to come up with the integrated development plan for the area in the next 2 years. So the plan should be ready by August 2019. The area that was declared a special planning area is divided into 3 settlements: Mukuru kwa Jenga, Mukuru kwa Ruben, and Mukuru Viwandani. All these settlements have about 30 villages. 90% are the tenants. So with lack of proper tenure and proper planning, the area has suffered really complex challenges. We find they lack proper services like water, electricity, poor infrastructure, no roads, poor drainages.
Kwa majina ninaitwa Christine Mwelu. Mimi ni mkaaji wa Mukuru katika settlement ambayo inaitwa Viwandani, na mimi ni mobilizer. Nimekuwa mobilizer kwa sababu hii eneo imekuwa declared na county government yetu ya kwamba ni special planning area. Ni kwa sababu ya zile changamoto sisi kama wakaaji wa kutoka huku Mukuru tumekuwa tukipitia. Tukapelekwa training tukiwa watu wengi wa community, tukafundishwa maana ya kuchukua data katika Viwandani, katika Ruben, katika Jenga. Baada ya kufundishwa tukaanza kufanya kitu inaitwa numbering na mapping. Tulikuwa tunatembea katika Viwandani, kuna vijiji 12. Kila kijiji tulikuwa tunachukua watu wa community, so tulikuwa tumepasi information kwa chief wetu na assistant chief pamoja na hata DO wetu. Wote walikuwa wanajua ya kwamba hii eneo imekuwa declared a special planning area, na watu wale ambao wao wanatusaidia tena katika vijiji wanaitwa chairman and chairladies, wote walikuwa na habari. Tulifanya numbering, tulikuwa tunaenda katika map ambao tumetengenezewa na wanamuungano, na vikundi tumetengeneza katika Mukuru. Saa hii tuko na vikundi 400 watu wale ambao tumewafikia. Kuna zile vikundi beleni zilikuwa, na kuna wengine katika hii shughuli ya kufanya tumeleta watu pamoja, wameanza savings. Wengine tumewafundisha mpaka hata tuko na vitabu zile ambao tunawapatia, ndiposa kila mtu akuwe na record yake. Tumewasupplier, na hata katika Mukuru kuna zile vikundi tumeweza kupata loan kupita kwa AMT muungano wana vijiji. Realize the need to bring on board various stakeholders who have various expertise in each of the different consortium. And we were able to mobilize about 40 organizations with different expertise in each of the consortium. Community mobilization has been a very detailed process. The 30 villages in Mukuru are clustered into 13 segments, where each segment has approximately 8,000 households. So in each segment, we clustered the people into 100 households. So the 100 households was used as a platform for people to discuss their issues. In the end, you will find that each segment will have 400 people representing them in each of the 5 consortiums. The total of Mukuru will have about 5,200 people. And I think that really shows how detailed this participatory model is, and how it puts the community first in the planning process.
And this is just to say that they were able to get the declaration of Mukuru as an SPA because of the decades that they had worked there and understanding the local dynamics, doing data collection both at the larger community level, understanding how many households there were, and then doing literally household level data collection, understanding how many people live in each size house, what is the size of the house. And so this is just a brief timeline of this consultative. It was a 2-year consultative process to develop this integrated sectoral plan for all of Mukuru. And so during it, there was quite a bit of studies done on it, and sectoral briefs and plans that were developed, as well as constant rounds of community engagement, community validation, and forums to make sure that those plans and voices and perspectives were there. So just to show you a little bit about, so on the far side, this was their organizing structure and how they wanted to make sure that they were consulting everyone who lived there and that they were part of this plan. So what they did is they basically they worked with the cell level, which is what's kind of the standard organizing unit within Nairobi, which is 10 households, and then brought 10 of those household cells together to create a cluster. And so that was the level that they consortiums. So there's different planning consortiums. And so the role that the SDI Alliance, which I should have mentioned, is Muungano 150G is the federation, and they have a support NGO SDI Kenya, and as well as another support NGO Akiba Mashinani Trust, which does some of their financial stuff. And so the key thing was that the SDI Kenya Alliance was coordinating, as you can see, number 8, they were in charge of coordination, community organization, and communication in all 8 of the sectoral plans, making sure there was engagement, forums were held, and that there was representatives in each of these technical working teams who were helping ensure community voices were in these plans. So, and this is also just to show you more recently in the last year, there's been a bunch of flooding, obviously, in Nairobi because of the recent, it was back in April. And so the Federation also is building on their data collection to try to understand what are the different risk areas, because this river goes through the settlement, and most of, obviously, households and things are right on the bank. So understanding the different types of risks that are in the settlement, and how these could be adapted, how it could protect the various, the land. So that was just a little bit about Kenya. So now I'm going to jump over to South Africa. Another example of some participatory design is around the element of reblocking. And so what reblocking is basically just refers to, it's called reblocking, blocking out. People do it differently. The reconfiguration of shacks or houses in dense informal settlements. And so in South Africa, the city of Cape Town adopted a reblocking policy, which was influenced by the South Africa SDI affiliate through their data collection. And what they said is the city really made the argument that, you know, we can't bring in basic services because there's no access roads, it's too dense. And if you've ever been to Cape Town, just because of the planning of the city, you'll see that all the informal settlements are outside of the city. And even where the informal settlements are, all the services are at the very edge. So you can have 500-600 households, and there'll just be a line of toilets, chemical toilets at the edge. And so that means if you have to use them at night, if you're a woman, if you're a child, you face risks of, you know, rape, crime, just by trying to get access to basic services. As well as, obviously, it's a lot of informal settlements are shacks there. In the summer, because of the heat, you get a lot of fires. So whether that's from cooking inside or there's a lot of illegal electricity connections, so those wires will spark. And as soon as one shack goes up in flames, the entire area goes down. And so the city was saying we can't provide any access in because there's no roads to get in to fight these fires. So what the SDI Alliance did in South Africa was set up this procedure around reblocking in clusters. So looking at, again, 10 households at a time and doing a reconfiguration with those households, with those 10 households, as well as the wider community, to figure out how to reorganize space. And I think one of the things that's interesting about the South Africa example is when they did it, the idea was to open up public spaces in the center of each of these clusters. So you would have open space and all the shacks would look out onto that as for communal food gardens, for washing lines, where the kids could play, where everyone in the community could keep their eye on them. And as well as then where the city could bring in, whether it be a water point or a sanitation unit. And so this is the national leader of the Federation, Rose, just saying how it's not just for them, it's not just about design and improving housing and that, but it's really their community organizing and mobilization tool. They get communities together to organize and to understand the needs of each other and to make kind of win-win solutions for the whole community. So just to give an example, Mashiniwam is a settlement in Cape Town. And this was back a few years ago, started in 2013, but it's really become kind of a standard in South Africa and actually went on to win the Cape Town Design Awards one year. And so this project was looking at 250 households in Mashiniwam. And so the process they kind of did to do this reblocking was, as I mentioned, they did their enumeration. So this is a household level survey where community members themselves are collecting data. When they're trained in collecting the tools, understanding, asking the questions, people are more trusting to share that information and their challenges rather than if it's an outsider coming in. So they did that. They also did mapping, measuring each and every structure to make a map to understand how much space each house took, because that was going to be needed in their negotiations on how to reorganize space. So what they did similarly is they did a bunch of kind of mapping using just paper, and they made cardboard houses to scale and basically would play around and restructure them and be like, okay, if I move my shack by a meter, that will allow, 1 extra meter. You can move yours a meter or two. That will give us enough room to open up a road so the city can bring in water, sanitation. And so one of the key things was with this and with Cape Town City adopting this policy is they then as a city provided 45 short-term contracts to local people through community contracting through their extended public works program. So the community was involved in the design. They were the ones doing the construction and the services, and they did it in groups of 10. The first pilot was around 10 shacks, followed by 10 more clusters of 10. And so this quote here from community members just talking about how it was so dense, and as I mentioned, the fires, all the toilets were on the outskirts. So this is just to give you kind of an idea of how it's done. This is a road that was opened up. I know it looks quite dry and dirty. There are community gardens and things, but this isn't one of the key access roads so that if there are any fires, they can get up. And this also then brought on partnerships with other organizations who are looking at kind of using fire retardant iron sheet and different kind of safety features. So not only did people get improved housing, access to services, it's improved the kind of conditions of the settlement, and it really set a standard to influence how government in South Africa was thinking about in situ slum upgrading. So now jumping to the other side of the continent, talk about a project in Freetown, Sierra Leone, Transforming the Lives program. So this is a current program that's been underway for the past 3 to 4 years, but it's built on the last 10 years of community organizing and data collection that's taken place. So this is a collaboration that's now being driven by Freetown City. So the mayor of Freetown is really a champion in the SCI Alliance in promoting, what's her saying? Let's looking at coastal communities, and this is learning from Kenya. So this is kind of trying to show the peer learning between countries and groups. So Sierra Leone has learned a lot from Kenya, and they're trying to implement this. And so they have been working with the Freetown City Council. They've gotten either 4 or 5 coastal slums. They mapped all the slums in Freetown, and there's 2 kind of types there. There's the ones along the coast, and then there's the ones on the hillside. And as you can see here, this is a coastal one, but because of how people have built with the rainy season, it's just washing away homes and areas. And so again, this is an integrated approach. This is just to kind of show you what's happened over the last couple of years. So as I mentioned, you'll see this map here. This is what the Alliance has done. They've done all the mapping of the slums, and there's 5 of these coastal ones that they have done a bunch more engagement and collaboration with various stakeholders to understand what are the different risk levels and what does that mean in terms of upgrading. Can we upgrade these people where they are, or do we need to look at possible relocations? And so using drones to do kind of initial mapping, validating with community-led. So you'll see here, this is kind of the start of how profiling happens. You get communities together, you collect the data, you try to draw what the settlement looks like, understand where you live, and this is a big game changer for everyone who lives in the community. Because during the validation process, communities will tape up a big map of where everything is. And you bring all the local leaders, the different interest groups together to really agree, is this what your settlement looks like? And it's a negotiated process. It's understanding, okay, I think the boundaries are here, and someone else will say, well, no, I live here, and if you go around this bend, this is also part of it. So it's understanding that, it's bringing, people have the visual thing, people have different ways of understanding where they live. But when you can put a map on and say, hey, this is where you live, that's extremely powerful for people to understand how they interact with their community, and understand the needs and kind of, again, where there needs to be some give and take. So then doing a lot of kind of community planning and mapping, digitizing that, understanding what that looks like, working with city government to see what are the potentials with the planning department. In Sierra Leone this past year, they also did a whole housing analysis, looking at various typologies, the different resettlements that may need to happen, where could the government identify land that this could happen on. And then during the same time, they're looking at, because this is all the coastal slums, there's a lot of erosion, and most of it around the coast of Freetown is these mangroves that have been cut down because the main livelihood is fishing and oyster farming. And oysters grow on the mangroves, and the only way to harvest them is to cut the plant. And so that's created a ton of rising water levels, bringing it in. There's no protection of it. So what they've been doing is working to replant the mangroves and doing kind of sustainable farming. So this is kind of what a mangrove seed looks like, and you'll see there's a tracker number on it. So the Federation has also designed, with their technical support, an app that tracks each and every one of these mangroves. And a community member they have a certain plot of how many that they're responsible for planting and ensuring that they grow. And they track it on the app, and they can see to make sure that if these were, donated or bought, which ones are surviving, and trying to understand how that works. So it's also a livelihood. They're getting a small stipend from the city government to kind of reinvest that. At the same time, they're working with other, they've developed different technologies for sustainable farming. So looking at using a string to get the oysters to grow on and doing that instead of cutting the mangroves. So looking at it from kind of a multifaceted approach. And so this is just to kind of explain how they differentiated on the different zones and the classification. And so obviously zone 1, which you'll see is the red right along the coastline, is the most high hazard, and there's no urban services, and that's probably where most likely they're going to need to relocate. And so the city is working with them and looking at, okay, what is kind of a step-by-step process that we can do to look at this. So this is some of just the maps that they've looked at. This is one of the communities along. You'll see this was all mangroves out before. It's come back. These are plantings of them. And there's a lot of kind of land banking and encroachment. So in terms of kind of the housing, they've held, as I mentioned, looking at kind of community designs for housing, understanding what people need, what is kind of the economic factors, the financial, what people actually pay for rent, how much they could afford, and that will influence the different types of housing. So just kind of from some of those few examples, some kind of key takeaways. These are both from Kenya, just to show kind of, this is a local youth group of the Federation did this mural, looking at kind of how slums are just dumping pits and how they want to see it. There's a lot of local-led climate champions who are trying to do kind of restoration and greening of the area. And then this is a local solid waste management, circular economy, kind of recycling group. So one of the things that we've seen is really that, you know, these strategies need to have an integrated approach, not just looking at housing, not just looking at services, but really bringing them all together, rooted in a local solution. People are, there's a slogan amongst all the federations saying that we are the problem and we are the solution. And no upgrading without us. Like, they want to be the ones at the center saying, here's what we need, and here's what we think we can do, and how we think this can be met. Seen obviously a lot of top-down approaches fail, so these kind of initiatives are really the bedrock for scaling to citywide transformation. And the use of really leveraging local knowledge. I think understanding and validating local knowledge, information as kind of the basis really supports collaboration, co-design in these solutions. And then obviously the need for cross-sector collaboration. Both Cities Alliance and SDI work through partnerships and networks, and understanding that no one can do it alone. It's too big of a problem. So thank you.
The question I have is, you have talked about participatory process, and I know Lawrence has talked about this as well. But then how do you, and maybe go to both, how do you get people to engage in the process? Because it's obviously not something that people are commonly used to doing. How to get people out of their minds? And I know you talked about certain interventions, but could you expand upon that a bit more? And also, in addition to that, and maybe as an anchoring to that, it's getting people to participate, having people talk through their journeys. It's very helpful in like brownfield situations where you have existing infrastructure and now you're trying to make it better, you're trying to implement some sort of intervention in a certain area, or working with things that are, or spaces really that are already inhabited in some way, and we're trying to make them function or better. How does this work in greenfield settings where, I'll stop there, so just thinking about that. There's other questions down that line, but we'll start there.
Thanks for the questions. Very good one. I think there's a very easy answer to how do you get people to do it. You just give them the tools. And I've been in so many sessions where there's always that moment at the beginning, you maybe put a plan or something on the table and you give them shapes to work with, and they become, you know, we're not going to do it, you know. And then somebody always steps forward and goes, well, yes, okay, you know, they break the ice, and then everybody goes, that's it. So whatever the situation, you have to think of the tools that you need. There's one thing I noticed in Mara's presentation which reminded me of something I've learned as an architect, which is that never put the plan on the wall. As soon as you put the plan on the desk, on the table, and you get around the table and start pointing at it, and the next thing is you have to learn is that if it's a plan of a building, you want to make sure it's in the right direction. So the wet room is over there. But even if it's maybe a slum area, it's the same thing. It's like get it facing the right way. So when people are looking at it, they're thinking, oh, I'm over there. That relationship between the real experience and the diagram. Okay. I can't remember what the other question was. I mean, there was one thing I wanted to say, listening to all the presentations as well. One thing I've learned, I started off working with communities. It's all about community of participation and design. That, those are the people who actually are disempowered as they are. But what I've learned also is that you start working with communities, actually the major stakeholders, funders and the big players, unless you get them as well, it's when the two come together that the explosion happens. And actually the big players are much more difficult to get to than the communities. The communities are ready to participate. So, I mean, I recently have one, we were doing that project. We had the government, we talked about PG doing the plan. And I remember going to the commissioner and planning saying, would it be all right if we invited one of the developers to come along? Because everybody's so used to just their own group, He said, okay. I said, no, you can't. Then when that person came, they knew more about planning than anybody in the ministry. So whichever project you're involved in, think who the stakeholders are who are not around the table and find a way of bringing them into the room. It doesn't matter whether it's a market from the account. It's not about bottom up. It's not about top down. It's both. When they come together, you get action.
Just to add, besides the tools, it's really getting the right people there. And I think understanding, making sure the people who are going to be using that space, that building, whatever it is, that product, that they're there from the beginning, that they have an investment in this is for me. I own it. I want to make it so it fits my needs. I think having those people around, I think being cognizant, I think being as inclusive as possible. I've seen a lot of times in communities, you'll find the few people in the corners who don't speak much or are just observing, but when you go and you get them to take some space and understand, the understanding that they have of the dynamics, the space, and what's needed. I mean, some of the most ingenious solutions have come out of those meetings of how to address things that government has been grappling with for decades. Development partners who can't understand, and they can make it just very simple. Like, this is what we need. Here's how to do it. And like, it won't be possible. It's like, yeah, I'll talk to everyone who this impacts and we'll find a way. So I think it's really a constant dialogue, negotiation.
As I last in my show, let's say one of the things that they're usually excused, especially from government, is well, we can't consult people because they'll start fighting and we'll open all sorts of kinds of worms. And of course, when you actually do go, as you said, there are conflicting positions. And I've always found the people in the community very good at resolving that's okay, and we go first, etc. And it's usually a sign of government or any one party trying to control the process that they need to assume is going to spoil.
Yeah, so it's definitely difficult, and we've had very many instances from which we've had to learn. I think it's also a lot of the practical stuff. So it's being intentional about who you invite to the session. It's being intentional about how long the session goes on for. So we've picked participants in workshops based on how much energy they're very likely to bring. Of course, you invite everybody else, but then you want those people that will ignite the conversation. We've also been careful about who we're inviting based on whether or not, so gender issues, there's a lot of intimidation of women, for instance, when it comes to conversations that involve everybody regardless. So it's about having separate talks that invite only women, and then maybe the men, and then being intentional about who comes to the sort of the session. know. It's also making time for those energizing activities. We always do icebreakers, and I see some of my students from the Sasa School of Industrial Design. It's icebreakers upon icebreakers. It's activities that allow people, that get people waking up and becoming more present. It's staying in touch with your participants way beyond the period of the workshop, as well as before. We've had people we've engaged with over several years, and so every time they see you coming to organize a session, they're very happy to participate. So yeah, it's a lot of the practical things around how to keep people involved, how to keep them awake, refreshments, very, very important. Are you providing lunch, or you're not providing? Yeah, so it's things like that. They matter so much, but of course you also have to stay on top of the topic. You need to know what you're talking about and not sort of shooting in the dark and hitting topics that in a way that doesn't really give confidence to your audience, to your participants.
I wanted this second question to be answered. More about sites that haven't been used before, but
We've done this. We just have to find the people who are going to be using the site, and then take them to the site and get them involved.
Maybe not necessarily walking with it, or how comfortable one feeling with Facebook, but just, in the middle of like Manhattan or something.
No, but I mean, we run in Liverpool with a housing board, and they came first step was come to the site. Now, each person say what they want, and then everybody wanted lots of spacing around, so we put all those together and find the space you want to throw right now. So they can get involved. And one of the classic examples from South America I remember reading of is when they relocate slums to a new space. Instead of putting a grid down, which is what people do, and then say, right, you go here, we take those slum dwellers to the space, and give each one a stick, and say, right, you've got where you want to go. So everybody reconstructs the relationships they had in the slum. That if you do the bureaucratic thing, which throw people into different situations and they can come through that.
anyone?
Good evening. Presentations. Actually, presentations. So I have a question about, of course, a topic which is participatory design, and in one of the presentations it was mentioned that participatory design as a solution, and as an example, I think from the design without borders presentation of that community, that water pump, and was designed to engage the children, but at the end of it resulted in something else, which wasn't the intention. And so, my question, our first question, is about how you measure or project the impact of that product or service that you're trying to design for your community. How is there a practical way you can measure how potentially it could impact the community? Because I know it's not okay. It's been heard of before, whereby a group of designers come together and design something for a community, and then 5 years down the road, it's out of use or it's being used for something else. I think there were some similar examples throughout the presentation. So, is there a practical way to measure that? And then, secondly, in terms of engaging the people within the community and introducing a new idea something that they're not used to. For example, some of these disadvantaged communities, like the slum dwellers in rural areas, they may not have been exposed to certain ways of life or certain technologies, and find they're actually content with their lifestyle. So how do you convince someone who isn't exposed that this thing they've never seen before is going to come and improve their life or make a positive impact, as opposed to just something that's alien and maybe just makes things more complicated for them. Hopefully,
Thanks a lot for the question. The question was, how do you measure the impact of the solutions you develop? I think we need to think, at least the way we do it is to think of design as a process that doesn't start with you sketching or with just a design brief. It starts with you collecting some data. We are often very fortunate that our partners, whether it's the School of Public Health in Uganda, we work with for a very long time, or CIPRB in Bangladesh, they collect a lot of data over a very long period of time that looks at what the challenge is, but also in what form the challenge exists. So if it's access to water, what's the baseline? How much water is being accessed now, for instance? Who is accessing that water? How much are they accessing? How far do they have to travel to access that water? And then a problem statement is created. So a design brief starts to formulate. But along the way, you're also very intentional about involving both same users and designing, but also testing the solutions, the potential solutions at varying levels, like I said, of fidelity. So you start with the most simple form in which that solution could exist, and then test it and get feedback. But the thing is, so once you deliver the final solution, what is supposedly the final solution, you still have to collect data that says, okay, so the distance for collecting water has reduced by this much. The amount of water that's being collected has increased by this much. We've had more participants engage in the action of collecting water. So there you're really starting to see from that data that you perhaps collected over a 6-month period, a year, you've started to see that there's actually some change happening based on the baseline that you had set at the beginning of the project. So a project is really not about design brief, sketches, wow, let's implement the solution. That's not what it is anymore, at least the way we do it. You're there before, you're there after, and that's why I said projects for us usually take about 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. It's not that the whole time you're in the field, you're sketching. No, it's just you space out the activities, and at every point in that period, you're trying to engage the users in that process. Also, for clarity, the pump project was an example of a project where the user might have not been consulted. I wasn't there, it was the 80s. Participatory design methods were not yet as established as they are today. So it's not, we cannot say that it was a project that was implemented out of bad faith, but we can learn from the experience that they had in that specific project.
Quickly, exactly what I liked about what Mara was saying is the way to start with data collection by the community, by the user, then move involved all the way through. And I think one of the things I'm learning about right now is this idea of the life cycle of the project. Basically, it's continuous. And what I'm working on right now is don't just build a thing, then you've got to operate, then you've got to maintain. And in terms of the sort of greenhouse gas and all of that, then you've also got to ask yourself, what happens when it's finished? What are you going to do with the roundabout when the project comes to an end? It's going to be recycled or what? And what's really interesting now is because of that approach, a lot of people are, sorry, I'm digressing, but they're actually making buildings electricity mountable because they know that within so many years they're going to be demolished. So why don't we make them into reusable components? So this kind of constant process, which is data driven at every stage, that's what I'm thinking of.
To add on your point about people in slums or in rural areas who don't necessarily, who are very content with it. I think it's a bit different in the urban informal areas than the rural. But I think there is one component that is needed for both. A lot of it is mindset change. And I think key in that is understanding the why, what are some of the barriers of why people want to keep doing these practices. I've done a bunch of work out in the refugee settlements in Southwest Uganda as well, and around like proper hygiene and clean water and washing hands. And a lot of it was just, you know, when you are disadvantaged and you're living day to day, you have to choose what are your priorities. And I can't afford a bar of soap to wash my hands with soap and water because I need to feed my family who only gets one meal a day. So it's understanding, looking at it from not just the use of it, but what are the other contributing factors that may be hindering a person, a family, a community's ability to access that? What are some of the gives and takes, and understanding, okay, so what maybe you actually need is, you know, a livelihood opportunity that gets you a bit more income so you can afford this, or maybe it's that, you know, if you can grow some more of your food, you'll have more money, or, you know, you can do soap making. So there's different ways to approach it. And I think looking at it in a multifaceted way is one angle. I think the other thing is community training each other. So finding local community champions who can really, they're living there, they can really kind of explain to people why you should do it. And I think one of the things with SDI is this collective model and using savings groups is an accountability measure. It's a peer learning measure. It's yeah. So I know, like, for example, there was one federation group. I forget what country it was in, but every time they had someone in their family that had jiggers, they decided, nope. We're gonna send someone, we're gonna identify someone who can come support you and learn, like, what are your problems, why? If you have jiggers, we don't want you as part of our group. This is a bit extreme, but they were able to like mentor and find the reason what was actually going on in that household, and how can we support you as community members to kind of change these habits or behaviors, and understanding what were some of the driving factors.
And maybe this will be a final question. Maybe thank you for your presentations. I have 2 questions. I wrote them down. So the first one is, I remember when I did my master's thesis research in the Southern Sudanese refugee camp in Sudan. I figured that part of their survival mode was creating breweries inside the refugee camps and selling alcohol to Northern Sudanese, which is absolutely illegal, but it was their survival mode. So if you come across these situations inside slums, how do you address that? Like, how do you deal with the economic aspects of slum dwellers themselves? And then the second question is, how do you scale your experience? Because if you say that it takes 10 years to work on a 200 check, within those 10 years, maybe another 200 have been created. So how do you actually assess the situation? If it keeps growing while you're working on it, how can you ever upgrade as well?
Good questions. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there isn't, and I think this goes back to the fact of these are super complex challenges, and there's not going to be a one size fits all. I mean, to the issue of a lot of people in informal settlements are doing very illegal things, but that's the only opportunity. So it's not just about a location. It's not just about having land, having a house. It's around what's their economic opportunities, what are the barriers. Is that, you know, for refugees in certain areas, is it because they don't have a right to work and so they have to find other things? Is it that there is no job market? Is it that they don't have the skills? Is it that they don't have the, so I think there's a lot of different things, and that's not going to be tackled in one way. So you need to, I think you need to look at like the multi-dimension of urban poverty, which is economic, it is, you know, it's a social thing, it's a political thing. And those things are going to happen. I mean, I think you also have to look at, okay, what's kind of the low hanging fruit? What are kind of the things that you can have change that will change the larger system or have a knock on effect? And that's different in different communities. That doesn't answer it. I don't think there is an answer. But then to the upgrading slums, this is also a very key issue and challenges. So one of the things is if you look at the main capital of most of these countries, slums, proliferation, expanding is constantly happening. And it's now to the point, especially in Kampala, the bureaucratic red tape to actually get things done and improve some of these areas is extremely challenging to do, whether that's because of who owns the land, the tenure, the different players involved. But so one of the things that we are doing is working with secondary cities. So looking at kind of, for example, how Kampala is expanding to Greater Kampala metropolitan area. So what are some of already these, whether people are settling in town, secondary cities, that you know in 10 years they're going to be, they're already, you know, get ahead of it. Here's some of the few things that you can do. I think there's issues of planning, policy, but it's not, again, it's not different things that you need to do to upgrade settlements that already exist. And there's different mechanisms and structures to address kind of ensuring that new ones don't develop, whether that's when people are coming to a new city looking for economic opportunities, there's no low income or affordable housing. So they're automatically going to go into an informal settlement or develop kind of organically there. So understanding those different yeah.
It's a multi-dimensional problem, and you know, thinking, we had a session recently about how do we stop slums developing in new areas. Like, for example, we were talking about Greater Kampala, integrated urban master plan, and they're saying, oh, you know, we'll just plan these areas and there won't be slums anymore. Really? You know, actually, the biggest problem we came up to was that if only some local governments could buy some land which could be available for low-cost housing, which is done properly, then you could perhaps move in the direction of having somewhere to accommodate people on very low incomes. That was one of the things we talked about. But I mean, when you listen to your question, it's also, why do we do this? And why do we do it? We've only done 200 houses and there's 2 billion. Why do we do it? You know, but obviously we all do things to try and make sort of inroads into the problem. And it's surprising, actually, as you go step by step over the years, and you find that you do make progress. And in ways it's surprising. And then when you look back, you think, wow, you know, if that hadn't happened, none of this would be here. You know? So I'm just saying that as a general point.
So the question, at least, the one I remember, was the one about, so how do you address the contradictions, the conflicts? So you highlighted the refugee camp in northern Uganda, where refugees are selling alcohol to people in southern Sudan. Southern Sudan is selling. Yes, so we get those contradictions quite a lot, but I think that takes us back to the role of the designer in a process like that, which I was suggesting is evolving to include a lot of facilitation of that process, and to facilitate also specific conversations with amongst stakeholders. I will highlight one example. We're currently doing that project in Uganda on the lakes of Victoria and Choga with the fishers and trying to see how to reduce the drowning rates. But there is a very heavy conflict between the army, the fisheries protection unit, as well as the fishers, and then you have the marine police somewhere caught somewhere in between. It's always on the news. Now, the fisheries protection unit, the army is mandated to protect the fish, apparently. But then marine police is mandated to protect life and property on the lake. Of course, the fishers are just trying to make money to survive. So what happens is, of course, the fishers, they're doing what they do best. They try and catch fish. But of course, the protection unit that's trying to protect the fish, is angry about people fishing very young fish. So what do you do there? You try to facilitate a conversation in which the fishers will understand why it's wrong to fish young fish, and then for the protection unit to understand why the fishers are doing this and how to go about. Of course, in all cases, you don't really have the authority to make any decisions, but from your training and from your experience, you maybe know that it's important to have this discussion and to make some certain considerations, during those discussions from a design and lead perspective. So many of my friends ask me, what are you doing speaking to politicians? You're a designer, you're an architect. What are these conversations about? And that's why I'm suggesting that it's useful for people with our backgrounds to be in these rooms pushing these conversations, because I think people see things in a very different way. I'll highlight just one more example. The same project, you have the Ministry of Works that says the regulations for life jackets should be a certain way, which, mind you, should include a reflector, a whistle, a pocket bag, a clear bag for your phone, a torch. How much is that life jacket? It's nowhere near the 30,000 that the fishers are willing to pay for that life jacket. So what do? Do you set regulations that make lower considerations for life jackets that can be used in this context? It's hard to tell. It's a conversation that we are having, and we are waiting to see where it goes, because that's what we're doing, is facilitating a conversation. But we are hopeful that we'll arrive at a point where we can agree that the standards need to be adapted to this context. What that means is a conversation for later. Let's start with this conversation for now. That's how I this conversation.
Okay, I don't know if you have any final words, final comments you'd like to share with the
Right.
yes.
Say one more thing. Now, I'm assuming there's quite a few designers in the room, and I'm a designer as well. And the question I always used to have is like, we have this thing, what we call design by committee. So if you get all the stakeholders around the table, do they come up with a good design? And therefore, if you do that, what about your skill as a designer? Where does that come in? I noticed in your presentation, it's quite interesting that going and finding things out, but then the designers bring their skill. So it should never be a worry that your sort of amazing design skills can be undermined by consulting everybody and bringing them together. But at the end of the day, you're still if you can exercise your skills in that context, you get the very best buildings. And if you can think about the best buildings, think hard about why everybody loves them.
Well, thank you. I really feel like we're understanding it's about stakeholders and negotiations and all different parties working together, which is very helpful to understand. I think we're going to wrap up. We're slightly over our scheduled time. But thank you everyone for joining us, those of you who are here and joining us online, and thank you to our speakers for your time and also sharing your experiences with us. I think that's been really interesting and very productive. We will record this online so that people can rewatch or continue to ask people.